Tonight, we're meeting the minds rewriting the future of mushroom cultivation right now. Full Canopy Santee, Ango, and Ryan Spooner are stress testing mushrooms like they owe them money, breeding genetics that are breaking records, and racking up wins at all the Psychedelic Cups. How they do it, what's next for the myco community, and seriously, how big can a Melmac get before it applies for its own zip code? Stick around. This is one conversation you do not want to miss. Yo, welcome to the MycoGeeky Podcast, where we explore the fascinating world of mushrooms and the people who love them. From expert cultivators to passionate foragers, we bring you deep conversations, cutting-edge insights, and everything mycology. Whether you're a seasoned mycophile or just curious, we invite you to geek out with us on the wonders of fungi and join the mushroom movement. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the MycoGeeky Podcast, the show where obsessing over fungi is less of a hobby and more of a beautifully unhinged life choice. I'm your host, MycoGeeky, here to help you dig deeper into the world of mushrooms and cultivation so you can take your at-home mushroom game from all right to your fridge is now 90% agar plates. We got an epic show for you tonight, so grab your lab coat or your favorite hoodie, and let's get growing. Tonight, we're diving into a conversation that blends genetics, experimentation, and a serious passion for pushing the limits of this thing we call mushroom cultivation. We're sitting down with Santee, Ango, and Ryan Spooner, the co-founders of Full Canopy, a team that's shaking up the myco world in ways you definitely need to hear about. These guys started in cannabis, but when Colorado's Prop 122 opened the door, they went all in on fungi. They've been breeding, stress testing mushrooms like they owe money, and refining genetics to an insane level, literally putting their mushrooms through survival of the fittest style experiments just to see what happens. And clearly it's working because they've dominated at the Psychedelic Cups with record-breaking potency and some absolutely massive fruit. But beyond the trophy, Santee and Ryan are big on community and collaboration. They believe the future of mushroom cultivation depends on sharing knowledge, refining techniques, and exploring the deeper chemistry of these fungi. We're going to talk about minor alkaloids, data consolidation, and what's next for the myco community. But before we jump in, please support the podcast on Patreon. It helps keep the show going and lets us bring you more deep dives into the world of fungi. And of course, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. All right, guys, welcome to the show. Santee, Ango, and Ryan Spooner, the co-founders of Full Canopy. What's up, guys?
What's up, Geeky?
How you doing today?
Here.
How am I doing today? Let's see. What is it? It's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I am sitting in my basement as usual and super excited because this is a rarity for me. Everybody always wants to record these segments at night, late at night when I'm totally exhausted. And you guys are awesome and amazing. And we get to do this during the day. So you guys are getting like a more chipper, fresh MycoGeeky than you usually get. So yeah, I'm pretty excited. Why don't you guys do this? You guys have been on my radar. I definitely pay attention to what's going on in the community. So I knew about you guys. And more recently, through a series of events, we started talking, and I said, you know, it's probably time for you guys to come on. In case you guys don't know, MycoGeeky is getting sick of shitty vendors. I am getting sick of the effect they're having on the community. So guys like Full Canopy, got to have them on. Got to tell their story. Got to hear what they're all about. So how about this? You guys already know, I know you guys watch the show from time to time when you're not making amazing genetics and doing all that work. Why don't you guys take turns? Give us those very first mushroom memories, like go as far back as you can. When was that first moment when you understood mushrooms exist?
That's when.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was probably just eating mushrooms on pizza, playing Super Mario when I was younger. Yeah, I mean, that's probably the first time that they were kind of like on my radar, but I definitely wasn't thinking about them in any like conscious way as far as, you know, medicinal use or psychedelics or anything like that.
For me, I'm originally from Mexico. I feel like in Mexico, they're a much larger part of culinary life. So similar, just eating them in food. Mario is an iconic piece of, I think, anybody from our generation, our childhood. And similar, it wasn't until later in college when I started to dive deeper into psychedelics and other medicinal benefits in mushrooms. So as a kid, really just in food.
Nice. Yeah, man, I hear a lot. I hear the Mario Brothers. I too remember, I liked getting the little making my little Mario guy a little bit bigger. Definitely thought mushrooms were cool.
Mm.
It's interesting how many people their first story is that they found a mushroom in the woods and they wanted to throw it against a tree, or it's on pizza, or it's a video game. There's really almost never do I get a variation from that. It says a lot about our culture. Now, Santee, if you're from Mexico, there is definitely a little more love down there for the Angos for sure.
There's no huitlacoche over here.
No, there's not. But I tell you what, dude, my neighbor, he's a little bit down the road from me. He grows corn, and he has figured out a couple ways of at least increasing yields of it. So I do get to partake from time to time. But yeah, it's hard. It's pretty hard to come by around here. Not like when you're down in Mexico and you can go to almost any street stand, and the ones with a line, you already know they're gonna have some they're gonna have some of the good stuff. They're gonna have the weird cuts of meat that taste so goddamn good. And yeah, God, definitely love me some Mexican food, man.
Yeah, those street stands are always worth rolling the dice on.
Yes, absolutely. Now the Indian street stands, I don't know if you guys are watching social media these days, but man, they are not being nice to the Indian street food vendors. I can tell you what, they are being mean. But boy, oh boy, they're catching these guys do some embarrassing stuff. Anyway, wow, did not think we were going to talk about street food vendors. All right, so first mushroom memories. All right, so now let's get into your guys' myco origin story. I want, before you guys met each other, before you guys started a full canopy, just get me right up to that door.
For me, it was in college. There was a yoga teacher at the school that was known as the quote unquote plug. So I was able to source some psychedelic mushrooms from him. We went to a friend's house that was near a lake and consumed those mushrooms. And the first thing I remember, I get goosebumps thinking about it, but really it's just that shift in perspective, right? And maybe trauma, difficult times in life, being able to look at those in a different manner. And after the experience, coming to the conclusion that this is nothing what it was made out to be previously, right? All the stigma and misinformation about psychedelic mushrooms was immediately removed for me. So with that, it was just peak curiosity. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to get my hands on cultivating, learning, reading all the research that was available. So it was in college that I had my first experience with mushrooms that were psychedelic that really piqued the interest. And since then, I really couldn't stop.
Nice.
Yeah, I think for me, as a bit of a late bloomer, probably more like my mid 20s, and just growing up with like Dare and all of these other things, right? Like I definitely bought into like the all of the negative speak, right? And then but joining the military and stuff, you just can't do any of that. So it was really like my mid 20s when I got out where I was able to, kind of have some of these experiences that were, you know, but definitely more recreational in nature, but pretty earth shattering, in some aspects. Just feeling gratitude for being alive and all of these other things, that when you're in your day-to-day life, they just kind of, maybe you don't feel that as frequently. So yeah, having those experiences was definitely eye-opening, and it definitely caused me to rethink a lot of earlier stuff.
I mean, also, isn't it just crazy? I tell a lot of people who like want me to basically warm them up to the idea, but they're afraid, and I just go, the entire way your brain works, the entire way it receives information from your eyes and your ears and your mouth and your skin and all your baroreceptors and your chemoreceptors and all this stuff, the way your brain synthesizes all this, it's just one operating program. And this medicine, this recreational drug, however you choose to use it, it will let you know that there are other operating systems and that your perception, your consciousness, you have, as a sober, completely non-psychedelic understanding person, you have not entered into the fuller understanding of you and what your brain can do and what your, forget about, yeah, the mushrooms are wise and they teach you things. And yes, it helps you understand, like, I liked how you said that. It definitely makes you realize how alive everything is.
Mhm.
And like everything's alive. Like, Jesus Christ, why the fuck is this rock talking to me? Or why is it moving? And why do you know what I mean? Like it definitely helps you feel those things, but forget about all that.
I like that analogy, Geeky.
If
I think about it as like my hardware is from 1989, but my software I
yes,
try to keep updated, right? My operating system, and
yes,
psychedelics is something that definitely helps me continue to update that operating system, not get stuck.
yes. Yeah. I love that. Yeah, and I think right now, this day and age, everybody, right? Like it's like the movie The Matrix. Everybody wants to wake up. Everybody is being woken up. And unfortunately, now they're they woke up, and then they're like, well, actually, the thing you woke up to is not actually the real thing. Now there's another layer. But I think people are of all ages warming up to the idea that this is a sacred, old, profound fungus living thing, entheogen, medicine, whatever you want to call it. But it can be used in a sacred, profound way to bring understanding to your life. And as people realize this, they for sure are either going to have to grow it themselves, find it themselves, or find people who are growing it well and safely for others. So yeah, I like
Mhm.
that. So
Key
so so
point.
so what gets you guys from, because I mean lots of people have had profound experiences on psychedelics. How do you go from having that profound experience to, like, how'd you guys meet? Why'd you guys decide to start a business? How much of your cultivation life happened prior to you guys meeting? What brought you together? Kind of get us up to that point.
It wasn't an immediate journey from that experience to immediately jumping into what you are asking about, right? For me, that was in Orlando, Florida. I'm originally from Mexico, like I mentioned. I grew up in Miami, moved to Orlando, then I moved to Boston for a corporate job. Then I moved to Houston for 9 months. It wasn't my cup of tea. Then I moved to Colorado. Luckily, I picked up a friend in Houston who was a mutual friend between Spoon and I. So he's the one that ended up introducing us. But when I was in Colorado, I got into the cannabis industry. I was part of the beautiful 99 plant count era here in Colorado. So I was able to grow plants in my basement. I got into cannabis in a software company. So I was in charge of the international business development for that software company, which taught me a lot about regulatory markets, pre-regulation, post-regulation, drafting regulation. And so that was a priceless journey, but always interested in mushrooms. 2018, 19 was really when I consistently was cultivating at home. I was growing tubs at home. I think we'll show some pictures later. And then 2019, 2020, 21, I think is when officially Spoon and I met through this mutual friend from Houston. He moved up to Colorado as well. And that's when I wanted to take a big shift from what I was doing, which was cannabis space. At that time, I had started a cannabis consulting company to help people remain compliant, specifically using this software to remain compliant. But I saw where the cannabis industry went. It took some wild turns, and the culture was kind of lost in the process. And so I just wanted to look for something else, and mycology kept calling my name. So 2021 was the official start day when Spoon and I met and decided to start working together. I remember at that point, I went from growing in tubs. My buddy Mike, who helped us set up this audio today, he's the one that first showed me his tent grow where he had opened bags. So he had mixed a method that the gourmet farmers were using with active varieties. And so that piqued my interest because that allowed me to grow different varieties in a smaller space. Tubs kind of take up too much space. You can only pack so many in a closet or room. So I shifted to bags 2021, and I brought one of those first bags over to Spoon. It was a sealed bag. So I was trying to fruit fully in a sealed bag in 2021. And I asked him if he wanted to work together. And he was working in cannabis too. I'll kind of let him tell his story of how we met.
Yeah, so I'll just start in like 2017. I was living in Houston and basically had been there, most of my, childhood, and then had went back after I got out of the military. And I was just tired of it, not a lot of outdoorsy activities to do and stuff. You're needing to drive 45 minutes to an hour and all that. It's a lot. So I looked at Colorado, came up here and started working in the cannabis industry, started as a trimmer, then moved up to the supervisor for distribution, and then moved into compliance. And my last year that I was there, when I was in compliance, I was just like super unhappy with stuff. So, being in the cannabis industry, there's a lot of parallels because you see, things with genetics and people, renaming stuff or, selling something that, isn't what they say it is. And, I didn't think about it at the time, but that translates very well to the mushroom space. But basically, my last year, I started just kind of looking around for stuff. I wasn't happy where I was, and I found mushrooms. So I think the first book that I had was I think it was like a Merlin Sheldrake book, and it basically just goes through, and there's really nice pictures. He does a good job of explaining processes.
Entangled Life, is that it? Entangled
Not
Life?
Entangled Life is really good. The colored version of that one is amazing. But this was one of his earlier books where he was
Okay.
talking about like how to make liquid culture with honey. It was more process based. So that was like the first book that I picked up and read. And then I started getting, I looked around in the shroomery, but I didn't really like the shroomery very much. It was hard to get like solid, good information. And so then I picked up the Mushroom Cultivator by Paul Stamets. And basically reading through that book was like super eye opening. So, that was basically 2020, kind of like beginning of the pandemic time frame. And my roommate was like, hey, like, let me introduce you to this guy who's doing some similar stuff, or he's like actively doing some of this. So then we met, and he brought over that first bag, and I remember he brought it over and I put it underneath like my sink, and I forgot about it for like a week and a half, and it wasn't even like fully fruited or anything. And then he came over like a week and a half later, Santee, and he's like, hey, like, how's that bag going? And I was like, oh, uh, here it is. And we pulled it out from underneath the cabinet, and it was Z strain. And it was just like this beautiful, like full flush in this bag. And so, yeah, I mean, from there, we kind of like just started talking more about things. I had read books, but I hadn't actually put anything into practice. So that's where Santee, was instrumental because he had been, actually putting stuff into practice for a few years beforehand. And then he basically, taught me everything that he knew. And from there, it really started, us down this journey into full canopy.
the little bit I knew, he multiplied times 100 easily at this point.
Nice.
I'm lucky to now sit in a support role when it comes to mycology and focus more on the business, because at this point we both do this full time, right? Luckily, we're able to do this full time. So I think it's the partnership that really allowed us to do that. Spoon can take a lead on mycology, I could take a lead on a business, and we can complement each other very well in that manner.
Mhm.
Man, so first off, it's pretty rare that you can find, and I'm not even just talking about in the myco space, in general, partnerships often go bad, right? Like if you can get a true working partnership that works well, you've definitely got lucky. So I think that's cool. You guys still working together, getting
Yeah.
along. I do not sense any deep rooted tension or animosity or resentment for each other. That's pretty awesome. I do think it's interesting. Not that you both came from the cannabis space, but that you came from a professional environment where things were being cultivated. So
Mhm.
you both have a perspective and a background of what it looks like to work for a business that takes that seriously and is trying to, succeed in running that business. And then Ryan being in compliance, following the rules, keeping good
Mhm.
records. These are all skills that I would say plenty of people in the space don't have.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
tracking. I'm sorry.
yeah, tracking everything from, well, what temperature was the room when I was growing this? And, I'm trying to figure out why this flush went really well, whereas, that flush didn't go well. Having a bit of that attention to detail and record keeping definitely helps. You want to talk just a little bit about what you guys feel that your experience in cannabis gave you uh that's given you a little bit of an edge now that you're doing this on your own for yourselves in a related but different space.
For me, I think it was more seeing markets we call traditional markets, right? So anything pre-regulation, and then the process of drafting those regulations. One of the best projects I've been involved in is drafting regulations that were proposed in the Congress in Spain. So I
Mm,
actually got to sit in Congress and present that project. And then seeing post regulation how they're implemented and how governments utilize technology to track and trace everything. And so I mean, it's priceless knowledge now that we're able to see what's going on in Oregon, start to track what's happening in Colorado, and have some opinions whether we should or shouldn't form a part of that regulated licensed market, because there's also other avenues like where we are now in genetics, right? The genetics companies in cannabis have sat outside of regulations from the beginning, and there's some massive companies that have been able to operate in this gray area, if we want to call it that, under, you can sell cannabis seeds as collectibles. So there's always these loopholes, and the regulations never even included genetics, breeding, none of that. It all started with a plant. Most of the markets where you got that plant, they're like, oh, don't ask, don't tell. So there's a lot of reality, real life scenarios that some people might not think about if they didn't live through it. And so that's helped from the perspective of how do we position our company, right? And we've shifted. We didn't have it clear from the get-go. We're always adapting, but that experience in cannabis to me was priceless.
Yeah, and I think for me, I think especially since I'm working with the mushrooms, developing a lot of different things, it was like every part of being in the cannabis industry was super helpful because the first year, uh, a lot of these companies, if you're coming in and you don't have a lot of experience, they'll kind of just sit you down in the trim room. So for the first year, I was just trimming and, uh, I can't remember the proper terminology, but you like take the plant down and you take all the buds off and everything. And so that was like the first year, and that correlates like directly with mushrooms, right? You're picking them and you're cleaning them and then you're dehydrating them, right? So like seeing that whole process for the first year I was in the industry was really good. And then moving over into the distribution side really helped to kind of like organize me in a way. because you're in there. And what I was doing was coordinating between a few different grows, looking at their inventory and kind of predicting what I would think that they would need, while also talking to the people at the grows, the inventory managers, so that we could be on the same page. So that communication between everybody, and actually looking at inventory and tracking it and metric and all these other systems was also extremely helpful. And then lastly, the compliance aspect was a real eye opener. And I think that we see a lot of this in the mushroom industry now too. But basically, you see how testing is done, and you see how companies navigate that, and it's just how the system is. It's not anybody doing really anything like nefarious, but you just start to understand that, like, this lab over here, you always pass for microbial testing, and this lab over here always gives you higher potency. So you strategize around that, and you don't want your stuff failing for microbials, because that's additional money that you have to spend. And this is, it gets very expensive, especially in larger grows. So the compliance side was very interesting, because you sit in on these meetings and there's a lot of tobacco and alcohol guys, and it's like, what do you know about cannabis, and they're basically implementing a lot of the same regulations for a substance that is very different. And I think that we see this also in the mushroom industry, not only with testing but also with regulations that might not make sense, but it's the best we have at the moment.
I think the term was DTC, dry trim cure. And it is interesting how, shifting to the mushrooms, we've seen whether you dry them slowly or dry them quickly, 120 degrees or lower for longer periods of time, and how that translates into now the testing that's available that we love to do to realize, how do the small changes affect the finished product.
Man, what you're saying there is there's a lot to this. It's not just a bunch of hippies smoking weed. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, man. The minute there is an emerging market, a truly brand new market, and there's money to be made broadly, I mean, make no mistake about it, right? You guys are gonna have your SOPs, you're gonna have your policy manuals, you're gonna have your compliance, your regulation. We're in America, boys. They're gonna scale that shit up real fast and figure it all out. Um, but not always succeed. Policy is interesting because someone has to write it. Nobody, these bills, these laws, the legislation, they can be hundreds of pages long. Who's gonna write that? You want to know who writes it? Somebody with a vested interest one way or another that hires the right lawyers. Or now I guess fucking AI could do it. I could probably be writing legislation like right now without even doing anything. God, what am I doing with my life?
It'd be better
Right,
than
but
most of it out there that was written by people that have no idea what cannabis or mushrooms even are, or how they grow, or
exactly.
let alone consumption of them. Yeah.
Or how do you, cool, we wrote a book, we wrote some policy. What does it look like to enact it? Did we fund it properly? Did we, how do we regulate it? How do we follow it up? Like you're talking about, Santee, you're talking about, software or sort of tools that are used to monitor for compliance and stuff like that. There's laws, and then there are the laws that are enforced. And we definitely talk about that on this show a lot, because right, we're all growing a certain kind of mushroom, and we're all doing we're doing that. But if that's all you're doing, doesn't seem like it's a terribly enforced law. Now if you start doing a bunch of other stuff, and especially if you ain't paying taxes on it, if you figure out how to make money on it and you're not paying taxes on it, that's when the government really starts getting interested. So yeah, I think it's fascinating just to hear you guys talk about that piece, and that you got a view of that from the inside out, and how it can't not give you a completely different perspective. You're not just going, "Oh, I grew a tub of mushrooms. I think I want to start a business." Right? Like you guys saw what a business looks like. You saw the regulation, you saw the process, you saw how many moving pieces there are, how complicated it can be, no matter how simple you try to make it. And that's definitely not gonna hurt you guys, I'm sure. So do this now. So you guys meet each other. You're Santee's teaching Ryan. Eventually, Ryan's teaching Santee. It's like a kung fu movie, guys. Right? Santee taught. Yes. Anyway, so I think that's very cool. Get me from just two guys helping each other out growing mushrooms to, you know what we should do? We should start a company.
I mean, first and foremost, right, we were working under an initial company I had, which was Cannabis Consulting. That was funding the mycology research. By nature, we're both very quiet. We keep to ourselves, work under a rock. But Prop 122 in Colorado was really what changed things, right? At that point is when we decided to become more public. That's when we decided to work under full canopy and showcase our work. So what happened that year is there was an event in Barcelona. I got to speak at the University of Barcelona. We did that as full canopy. We had the event locally here, which was MAPS. So we were able to go there and showcase our bags for the first time, gauge people's reactions, which was great, more motivating than anything we've done before. And then the first Psychedelic Cup in Denver also around that time. So Prop 122, I think, is what really changed it so that we came out to the open. We're more public with our work.
Yeah, I think it was sometime 2022 when the Prop 122 passed. And I think it was November, December that we started Full Canopy, started operating under Full Canopy Genetics. But yeah, I mean, before that, we basically took the time when we met to really sit down and we built a flow hood because Santee was working in a still air box. And when we made the decision to go full in bag fruiting, a still air box just wasn't going to cut it. So we had to do a flow hood. We created that, which was really cool because it gives you a basic understanding of how these things operate. So when you then have to go out and buy your own and it breaks, you can actually fix it rather than having to pay somebody to come in. So that was extremely helpful. And during that time, we also did a lot of fruiting in a Martha and basically just figuring out how we wanted to proceed, because we had a couple of strains and Santee had taught me how to work them. And, I started reading, radical mycology, revamping all of Stamets stuff and just absorbing as much information as I could. And you see all of these different processes for being clean and doing other things. So the flow hood really allowed us to accelerate our growing and research, and it allowed us to then branch out into more strains that we would then work to basically work in a higher CO2 environment. So basically the way that went is we were in a Martha and everything was open, right? You put it in a bag and you cut the top of the bag off and it's open to the environment after it's fully colonized. And then, it's a lot of work to cut all of those bags off. So we were like, well, what if we just cut around the filter patch instead? And so you're still in that Martha environment with a high humidity and everything, but it's just the filter patch that is gone, which is allowing that FAE. And then after we got our genetics to work there, it was like, okay, well, what if the bag is completely closed? And this was kind of like Santee had brought me on my first bag and it was completely closed, but we needed to work the genetics in order to get them to the point where they would work in a filter. And, we messed around with all the different filters, the A's, the T's, the B's, and we eventually settled on the B filters for in-bag research. And, basically by the time we got to the end of 2022, we had a few different strains that, proved out that we could do this by taking clonal and filial generations and moving them forward. And that's kind of where we started, was okay, everybody's doing this, nobody's really measuring their CO2, we are, and we see that when we're at a specific level of CO2 in the air, you're getting different morphologies or different, fruit sizes and stuff. So, we went around to a bunch of different people. We got to see the way different people were doing things, and that was really cool because we were like, oh, we're doing something that is, other people were doing similar things. But I think that the training for higher CO2 was something that set us a little bit apart.
I think still to this day that part is interesting, right? The B filters are the 5 micron filters, and variety specific. It's amazing to see how they perform different in a 5 micron, 0.5 micron, 0.2
Oh
micron. Like
yeah.
we fruited in the
Mhm.
the grain bags too, but not all of them like that. So yeah, it's nice to mess around with the CO2.
Mhm. And
Yeah, I saw a lot of evolution. I was in a server back in the day, and the some Canadian guys were really into growing in bags, and I was a tub guy. A lot of America was tub guys, so I feel like I saw a lot of that changeover. And boy, in the beginning, nobody was talking about training them to choke on CO2. Nobody was talking about specifically like how to get more air in there. So just the fact that you guys were going, oh, okay, so well, not enough air in here. We got to cut the tops off. To well, maybe what if we just cut the patch off? To what if we over time can we actually teach these things? Like you said, whether you're cloning or whether you're going back to spore, there should be a way. My logic has always been if you happen to get a flush where one fruit is just the clear and obvious winner, the standout, the overachiever, first to fruit, first to open up, uh, that one seemed to like being mistreated a little bit. So maybe I'm going to clone that one, grow that out, then go back to spore on that one. And I can teach these things to take a little abuse. So we were doing all that. We were cutting slits and things. We were, putting micropost tape on stuff. We were poking holes with needles, trying a million and one different things. But eventually, you're right. Not a lot of people were doing it. I feel like there are more people I know now who feel like I sell genetics that are trained for bags. Is the phrase a lot of guys use. In
Mhm.
this day and age, that's not a bad thing to have, right? Man, if there was a cultivator or a company that literally had a menu where you could go, filter by, or do you grow in monotubs or do you grow in bags or do you grow in Marthas? That would be like a whole nother level
Mhm.
of coolness. But I like that piece. I think that's cool. It really demonstrates that you guys were fully adopting a new tech, a new approach, and then having like a very systematic approach to looking at how to make use of that in the best way. I think that's a really, really important piece to that story. Very cool to see. Not everybody is that thoughtful about that. They're just waiting for somebody else to figure it out and then just tell me what to do. That's,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's cool because, like, if you just sit down and you read some of these books, there's a lot of really good information. And, you read the mushroom cultivator and there's literally CO2, like, ranges for each of the different
Oh,
strains.
yeah.
And I mean, you're like, oh, like these guys back in like the 80s were figuring this out already, right? So there's, definitely like a lot of really good information out there that, we can learn from that has, it's been out there for 100 years, right? Or it's been out there for, for cubes and stuff more recently. So I think that really finding ways to get to that information and then figure out how to make it work for you in your specific environment is extremely important to us because I can't ever remember this guy's name, but we were making stasis tubes for a little while, and then Edward Grant told me about the paper Castellini, I think, or
Mm.
I can't remember exactly. His name sounds like a font, but basically, you read about this guy, and in like 1920, he was putting stuff into distilled water and stasis tubes, basically.
Yep.
And then in 1939, he comes back out and he's like, oh, these things are still kicking, right? So it's cool, you know, that you put something into practice and then you go and you read about it, and it's like 100 years ago, this guy had figured this out, right? So, you know,
Bro, back then they didn't have Netflix. They didn't have a phone. They had
Mhm.
nothing. FAFO was all they had.
mhm,
Yes, absolutely true. It's interesting that your story is definitely heavy on the attitude of, well, I gotta absorb material, right? Like I have to take in. You're a good student, right? You're like, well, where's the textbook? Oh, you're testing me on the textbook. Okay, I'm gonna read the fucking textbook then. Um,
mhm.
Not everybody does that, and
Yeah.
there is a lot of gems in there. And I think you said something really interesting, which is you wanted to figure out, there's a lot of ways to skin this cat. We want to find the way that works for us. I think if you know what you're really trying to do, what you're really trying to accomplish, it makes it a lot easier to start weeding through all that stuff, right? Like, okay, well, that works, but I see why they're doing that. Like, oh, that tech is kind of neat, but that's like if you don't have access to X, Y, and Z, like a still air box. That's
Mhm.
cool. It serves a purpose. But
Yeah, and
if
it's
you have a flow hood, what
yeah,
if
it
you
change
die?
it completely changes the game, right? Like
Yeah.
now, you know, this flow hood behind us is like a 4x3 or a 4x4. And just having that amount of space, you know, it's way more comfortable, and it allows you to use XLS, you know, the XLS bags, which are bigger, right? Or if you had like a tall tub, it allows you to fill that up and be much more confident that everything is going to be clean, which is, I think, the most important thing, right? You need consistency.
Yeah, man, that
So,
thing,
mm,
my XLSA bag is just like just below the top,
mm,
just below, and I'm like, do I gotta? Yeah. So
yeah, you got
that
to
four by
offset the
three
tables.
is
Hmm.
nice. That's
Hmm.
nice. Yes.
Offsetting the tables is a good point there. That's
Oh
been
yeah, low
going on the week.
boost, low
Yeah.
Hmm.
boost.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think, you know, everybody's environment's going to be a little bit different. Everybody's going to approach things a little bit different, and there's value in all of it, right? Which is why it's important, you know, for people to, you know, do research in different environments, because, you know, what he did, you know, what Castellini did back in the 1920s, right? Like we have different environments now, more central air conditioning, other things that change the variables. And if you're not, you know, accounting for those things, you know, you go from one place to another, you know, one state to another, whatever, you know, your humidity changes, like all these variables. So it's good to have all of that in mind when you start, so that there's less things that can surprise you.
But don't worry, something always will.
Yeah. Hmm.
Sooner or later. Yeah,
Hmm.
something always will. Man, I remember my buddy Tim, he pours plates. He moved from kind of Detroit area to Lansing area, and the water was different, and it totally threw off his agar. He for a while he had I think it was just like buying distilled water from the grocery store or something until he could get a RO system installed. But yeah, it's crazy how whether it's the seasonal changes. Right now I'm getting everybody showing me pictures of dried out tubs, and I'm like, sure, what's the relative humidity in your basement right now?
Hmm.
Probably half of what it was in the summer. So, okay, go figure. Mix your sub a little more wet. Um, but every little thing plays a role in all this. And so, guys like you who come from environments who already knew that, already knew how important every little thing is, you guys like just already are coming in with the right mindset. That is a hard lesson some people have to learn through a lot of failure and a lot of expense.
Hmm.
So, I
We're
think
still
that's
learning it on every
phenomenal.
move. Yeah. Check
Oh,
the
sure.
pH of your water. Yeah. Your
Yeah.
room humidity,
Hmm.
central ACs. They're not all the same. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, one of the
Totally
things
not.
that you said in another podcast was, you know, the age of the home. And that wasn't something that I'd thought about, but it's like, it makes sense, right? Like this home has been, you know, your warehouse, wherever it is it older? Well, maybe there's more stuff floating around in the air, and maybe you have to make an adjustment in order to account for that. Or if it's a newer home, maybe you get lucky and you don't have to be as clean, so there, yeah, just things like that, are super important.
You really don't know some of these old homes. I mean, shit, maybe there's some old 1918 bird flu, floating around in there. You name it. The likelihood of increased distribution of pathogens of different fungal airborne species is higher. That old home has lived through more life.
Mhm.
It's seen more things. It's gone through more weather changes. It's been introduced to more stuff than that squeaky clean new home has.
Mhm.
If you
All
can't lick the walls, then you might want to be
Yes.
careful with your grow too.
Definitely. I don't know too many walls I'm trying to lick, but yes. If your walls are washable and you grow mushrooms, you should definitely wash them and at least lick them once.
If it's not lead paint.
It better not be this day and age. Yeah, better not be. But that is you said something about that if you change the CO2 concentration, you were noticing different morphologies.
Mhm.
And I think that little piece is something for any cultivator at any level to really, if they've considered it before, reconsider it. This is a living thing, not like a human being. When I'm in Los Angeles, California, in 110-degree heat, my physical morphology does not change than if I'm in Canada in the dead of winter, right? I'm the same. Maybe I'm sweating a little more in Southern California, but essentially, I don't morph. I don't change who I am. Plants have a cycle, but they generally speaking have a certain look, right? Like maybe a tree loses its branch or something like that. Whereas with fungus, right, it is just mycelium. And when it gets lucky enough for us, not for them, right? They don't want a fruit. But when they have to fruit to keep themselves going, there are a whole bunch of factors that play a pretty big role in how rapidly the fruit forms, how big it is, how small it is. There are species that can have quite a range in size, and in how fast they develop, all based on a bunch of different factors. And as cultivators, I think the more you spend, especially if you are really into this and you want to start affecting a change or controlling morphology, no end to the FAFO projects, no end to the side by sides, no end to running something a certain way for a period of time until you really feel like you got a sense of what that little change made. Cake depth, how quick your cake evaporates. Because I mean, I see people throwing out tubs all the time. If it ain't contaminated, I'll sit on the tub. And I got stuff that anybody else would have thrown out, a month out. Up, it stalled, it's not growing. If you just bottom water that thing a little bit and ignore it again, it will slam out some fruit eventually. Like it is really fascinating to see all the different ways you can twist its arm, play games with it, be nice to it, be mean to it, and see what that does to the fruit. That's just a different way of thinking about morphology and controlling morphology that I don't know that the average person these days is spending too much time thinking about.
Yeah.
Some of the most resilient genetics we have were from fruit that grew outdoors on a spent block. Right nowadays, we compost in a garden bed and see how resilient they are. They continue to fruit even when you think it's done. It's not.
Yeah, it's very similar, I think, to plants in that, for some plants, you kind of like break it and it forms a knuckle and it's stronger, or you need wind in the room in order to allow that stressor to make it stronger. So I think it's the same with, fungi and mushrooms, right? If you can stress them in a specific way, whether it's introducing a contamination or having a higher CO2 or maybe freezing it and then thawing it out, right? I think that these stressors can be really important when it comes to getting more I don't know, durable fruits, or just fruits that will do better in more environments, right?
Right.
Because if I have a high CO2 environment and somebody takes it and they put it in a tub or they put it in their Martha or whatever it is, the likelihood of it working is much higher, because now,
Right.
if you put it into an environment that's a bit more natural for it with a higher oxygen, and it's going to be like, oh, amazing. And maybe you even get a slightly different morphology, right? Like maybe it squats out or something. So I think there's definitely something to adding stressors in order to make your genetics better or stronger or more resilient.
Just the fact of talking about that, it's showing me that you're thinking about this in a totally different way. I want strong, vigorous genetics because one thing that I don't think too many cultivators understand, um, definitely not beginner or early intermediate cultivators. Maybe once you really get into this, it starts being more apparent. But I've even talked to people that have grown for longer than me, and I don't think they think about this too often. It's always the fungus as it exists in nature is around all sorts of other organic matter, organic life, other microbes. They are competing even amongst themselves as the spores disperse and they land and they germinate. They are growing and dikaryoticizing, and different colonies are competing for the resources, even within the same species. So this we're so civilized now. We don't think like this. We got it so easy, right? We're just
Mm,
life is never not fighting for survival against other life. This is all the time. And so if you if you're a cultivator, do understand that in at any point in time in this process, it is likely, especially once you're in the less sterile process of spawning to bulk on this stuff and introducing fruiting, it is always competing likely with something else. And very often, you can get a wonderful flush, and you just never know that it actually was fighting some Pseudomonas or some other yeast, or you just don't actually know what was going on there because no one's taken the time to figure that out. But it wants to do that. So like you just said, like if you go to the gym, do you get stronger? I don't get stronger if all I do is lift the amount of weight that I can lift until I can't lift it anymore and I stop.
mm,
I get toned, maybe. I get some sort of health benefit, but my muscles don't get bigger. They only get bigger if I go, you motherfucking muscles, I hate you. I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to fail completely. Like somebody's got to help me push that last rep up. And then I even got to just barely like, it's not until you've completely obliterated that muscle tissue that your body goes, uh-oh, that wasn't enough. I
mm.
got to do more. And then now you're stronger the next time. Yes, that concept is a great concept for the mushrooms, because then the minute after the guys over here at Full Canopy have gotten done treating their genetics very mean, very poorly, being so cruel to them, then you get them at home and you take care of them and you baby them. They're gonna be living their best life. That's a killer concept, guys. That to do it for that reason is really cool.
I appreciate it. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right, so let's do this. You guys got a bunch of photos and stuff like that. What should we start with? You want to start with some bags? We've been talking about bags.
For sure.
All right, let me pull off this overlay. All right. Gotta love some bags. Gotta love a full canopy bag right there.
Hmm.
All right, so talk me through what we're looking at here.
Yeah, so basically what we have is so at the top left here, that is a long white clouds. And so our substrate, we basically do a CVG base, and then we add a few additional amendments. And what we found is that our substrate generally will get larger fruits, and then in the environment, it will allow for taller fruits, right? Because they're stretching for that oxygen. So generally, your yields will go up, when you do things in that way. But yeah, so at the top here, it's basically long white clouds, these top two pictures. And I think that that was after 3 generations of taking it back to spore. Generally, when we work something, we intake it, and then we immediately try to grow it out and just see what the normal morphology is going to be. And after we have a good idea of its entire life cycle, like what I like to do is grow it out and let it rot the first time. So you get that entire life cycle where you can see where the ideal time for fruiting is. And then you just let it go because each strain will rot in a different way at a different pace. So that allows you to really stretch the time frame and see when exactly you need to harvest this thing for, your ideal yield or whatever it's going to be that you're looking for.
Bro,
So
that right there, I can't love you harder for saying that. There are people who are growing mushrooms either way too early. Some of them are growing them, harvesting way too late. But I had, I'm not going to say which one it was. I had something that I thought I knew its full life cycle on, but I did
mm,
not ever let it go until it truly started degrading. And through just forgetting about it, that happened one time. And I'm like, oh, these fruits are actually twice the fucking size I thought they were.
mhm.
Like, holy crap. That is such a very true statement. I cannot I can't applaud you enough for that idea. If you're working a new cultigen, yes, you just don't actually know it until you know it, right? It's
Yeah.
almost it's like when you're dating somebody. Oh, you're on a date, you're at a nice restaurant. Oh, cool. They're nice and pleasant. Of course. You know, let's see them when they get a speeding ticket. Let's see them when they run into their ex and the ex says something nasty to them. Let's see them on a bad day.
Mm.
Let's see the full picture of them. I think that is a really cool part of your process.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's like we really want to get to know the strains that we eventually release, and that starts with the entire life cycle, right? So like, that first time that we grow it and we see its entire life cycle, we're also trying to check the spores. We're trying to see how it's going to react whenever we take a clone to it. Most of the times we take a clone of something, it's fairly tomentose, and then you change up your nutritional media and then bring it back to the original media that you had it on, and then it's like, more rhizomorphic or it's more vigorous. So I think that all of those things are like extremely important whenever you're intaking genetics, right? It's like you want to get to know its original form. And then as you work it and you put it to testing, you can really understand how the alkaloid profile changes over time in successive generations. And you can see the actual morphology and all of the different phenotypes start to appear, especially when you take it back to spore, right? And you get those multi-spores from the same strain, where then can really get into some weird stuff. But
Wait a minute. Hold
mm,
on. Hold on. You mean I can't just grow it, try it, and then think I'm magically improving its potency because it looks different or whatever, and then I try it and then subjectively just decide that it is more potent? That doesn't
mm,
work? What?
I wish.
We haven't brought this up. We can talk about it later, but we have a cool machine in house that we use to try to quantify potency as well, right? It's nothing that would replace an HPLC, but at least it gives us a
It
better
ballparks
idea.
it for you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, that piece, so saying that suggests, or that should encourage people to go, instead of going, I want to have as big of a menu as I can because I want people to just be able to buy whatever they want from me. Instead, you would go, I want everybody to want to buy the few amazing things that I have. It's just a completely different business model. And
Mhm.
it in that way, it is a unique one because that is not what most people are doing anymore.
Yeah, we had a bunch of genetics on our website, and we had to downsize the amount that we had because we just bit off more than we can chew. We felt like we could do a little bit more, and then you start to get some like drift or weird things that start to happen, and it's like, okay, well, I don't want to give a customer a bad experience. by giving them something that I'm not regularly testing. And so that's how we got down to like our current, I think it's 12 or 13 strains, is because that's much more manageable. And then, we actually have personal lives rather than just, managing these things all the time. Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there.
Another thing I'd add is just the ethics, right? Something that Spoon and I agree on is the ethics of knowing that at the end of the day, we started this company with other people's work, right? It's not like we went out foraging for all these genetics, nor did we just breed them ourselves. So putting something out there as full canopy isolations that were thoroughly worked by us is something we agree on, and then avoiding the opposite, right? Even though we have over 100 different cultivars, we wouldn't put anything out there that we don't feel like we have truly worked ourselves. So out of the 100, we really only have 12 on the website for several reasons, but those being thoroughly worked and agreed on ethical perspective of that.
Yeah, and we can kind of go into like the process, if you want to, also of like how much we work it before we're comfortable releasing it too. So basically, whenever we intake something, we will, like I said, we'll grow it out so that we can see its original morphology. We'll grow it into, on our substrate in our environment, and then from there we will basically take a clone of whichever one we like. That's our backup, and then we'll carry it forward a generation. And when you look at plants, generally 5 to 10, but sometimes 20 generations is what it takes in order to make like, what is considered like a new cultivar. And so we kind of try and stand by that, where, if we're working something, then we'll try and take it, anywhere from 5 to 10 until we can get it fairly well stabilized. And a lot of times it just kind of takes that long, right? Like you take a clone of something that works in your environment, and then you carry it forward generations and you like restore its vigor, and you add different nutrition that also helps to like restore its vigor. So like sometimes we'll get things and they're pretty weak, and you have like this separate process you need to do in order to kind of bring it back. And that's stuff that we've like pretty recently learned, which I think is pretty important, because a lot of this stuff is in like these books, but then like you take a class and somebody's like, oh, this is really good. And you're like, oh, like I read this like a year ago and now, so, but
yeah, what else about that? The, sometimes you get stuff and you've seen pictures of it. Your buddy, grew it out and it looked good. You wanted to get it, you get it and you grow it and it looks just like it. And you're like, great. Sometimes you get it and it actually looks better. And you're like, oh, wow, I must just be, of course the ego immediately just says, it's just me. I'm fucking amazing. Like they just love me more. No one ever goes, oh, maybe the physical cultivation process for me is a little different than it is for the person you got it from. Maybe they like my sub better. Maybe they like whatever better, my environment. But then to speak to what you're talking about, sometimes you get something and it doesn't do well. And the first thought is just, it's garbage, throw it out, move on. No one, or not no one, but some people are just not ever connecting the dots and going, oh, it might just need a minute to get used to me, my techniques, my substrate, where I'm at, my grain, what have you. And yeah, that's a really important step that I think people miss out on a quality genetic because they haven't taken the time to, just hold its hand a little bit longer.
And especially when you're in these like non-traditional growing environments and stuff, by taking it forward generations, from spore, you're really helping to kind of like cement some of that like metabolic pathways, whatever it is, into the genetics, and you're helping to make those, I think a little bit more dominant. So, it's really important, I think, to change up nutritional profiles, but everybody has like their standard thing that they use. And, you can just have an agar plate with that and train it up on that and kind of like kickstart the process. So, back to, like 5 to 10 generations. But, sometimes it doesn't work out. We have an albino MVP that we've been, working for a while, and it just doesn't want to put out more than a couple fruits per bag. And, hopefully it works soon, but maybe we have to shelve it and move on to something else, or just rethink how we approach that specific genetic.
Well, also, to go on that, have you ever done a grow along where if the grow along starts from spore, if people send out swabs and everybody's like, oh, look at my flush, it's amazing, and then this other guy's like, oh, my flush looks like crap, and everybody wants to just go, oh, well, he's a good grower and you suck. No one ever says, well, we all got a random distribution of spores. They dikaryotize completely differently. Who's to say he didn't just, roll a nice hand of the dice genetically and he got something good? So maybe, maybe you got to go back to spore. But if you don't get it from spore, then how do you do that is of course the trick. But
Yeah, just got to get the swabs and, hope for the best, especially on some of these, like the higher your CO2 is, generally the less spore load you get. That's another thing that I really like. So it's helpful because you get less spores, but if it already didn't produce very many spores, then you're really searching to try and get some of those.
Yep.
Mm.
Now, have you guys ever done, you guys might be the right people to ask this because usually I ask this question and people are just like, I never done that. Have you ever experimented with, since you watch so carefully the full life cycle of a given cultigen, are you paying attention to when the spores mature? Like how early can you start getting spores? And then have you played any games with, all right, so I'm gonna swabble a melly, when I first get some spores, plate that, wait a little bit to try to get a sense of, is there like a sweet spot for is there a better, are the first spores crappier? Are the later spores better? Do you see where I'm going? Okay.
Yeah. So at the beginning of 2024, we, got our first microscope and really started into breeding. And that's basically like the period of time that we started asking ourselves these questions, because you watch different videos, you read different books, and people will talk about like maturation of spores, taking them too early, taking them too late. So like I've gotten in there, I'm starting to do a lot more of like measuring and just figuring out like the actual life cycle of the spore before it gets ejected, or as it gets ejected. So it's like it's really cool doing that. I think that we have I think we have a fairly good understanding, but I want a little bit more time with it before I say anything definitive, because like we've got a lot of strains that we've had successful crosses with, and I've measured the spores and all that, but it's only been a year, right? So we're still, I would say, very early on in that process. And, I would say that we need a little bit more time to come up with like a good, a better understanding of that.
Taking 20 steps back from that, I think one of the coolest lessons learned was just how to take a swab, right? You don't want to take a hard swab and then be getting some gill tissue and really putting a clone on the plate. Is like getting the spores
as a breeder, you don't want to.
Correct.
But otherwise, it's the slickest way to send a tissue culture, right? Like I have gotten swabs that are like that, and all of a sudden, just the most rhizomorphic, ropey, amazing looking growth, and I'm like, cool, okay, well, that'll be the clone plate, and then where are my actual germination colonies at? And we'll pull from that.
And that's one of the reasons why we don't have spores on our website, is because we don't want to release something that we don't have a way better understanding of, right? It's like we take spore swabs, we take spore prints, we do the breeding, we do all of this stuff, right? But I think it's really important to be confident in your understanding before you release something to the public, and then you have just a crapshoot where they're like, hey, none of this is germinating, right? And we want to really, give our customers, they're paying us for something and it needs to work, it needs to be good. So, yeah.
Well, and it's just a different business model. It's like when you walk into Best Buy, if every Best Buy was organized differently, you'd be like, this Best Buy, the computers are over here, that Best Buy, they're over there, right? There's a reason things are standardized. So you know, it's a business decision to go, we want consistency. We want our fruit to look like what they think it's going to look like.
Mhm.
That's an entirely different game than like the Dave Wambach game or the Ed Grand game, which is do you like to gamble? Here you go. Here's F1. You might find the coolest new cultigen of all time, or you might not. You know, it's just a different game.
Mhm.
But I think that what you guys are doing is actually been lost a bit lately. So I think it's really important that there are people like you guys who are saying, we have done some work on these. We are proud of these. They perform. They're gonna get a 1600 on the SAT. But by our overachieving genetics, and so that's a brilliant thing to be doing. It's setting a bar. The bar has been lowered recently for sure. So
It's
I'm digging that.
it's also just like trusting but verifying, right? Like I can read tons of information out there in different books or online, right? But the observation is the really important part, because I don't want to just be parroting something that I just read.
Right.
I want to have actually visualized it and understand a bit better the process.
So what you're saying is you don't like hanging out on Reddit.
No, Reddit's fantastic. But
I'm teasing.
yeah.
I'm teasing. I feel like there's a bit of parroting on Reddit. I mean, there's a bit
Definitely,
of
yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah. And I
love
mean, I think everybody's guilty of it, right? You know,
Sure.
I say that, but I, of course, like parrot things that I've just read. But I think it's like different doing it like in your personal life versus
Yeah.
like something
Oh,
that
yeah.
you're going to be selling to people.
I'm with you on that. I like
Mm.
that. All right. So let's
Sorry,
pull
we can
these
get back to the
pictures
pictures
back
if you
up.
want. Yeah.
Yeah, I pulled them off because I was like, we're not even talking about this picture right now. So let me just let's fill the screen up here for a second. All right. So the what did you call the top something clouds, right?
Yeah, so the top two are the long white clouds.
Okay.
Normally, we take a few different pictures of each bag. The middle left one looks like an ODPE,
Mhm.
and then the middle two, that looks like albino Gumby. You can tell those kind of look a little bit thicker, a little bit more like Melmac-y.
Mhm.
And then that bottom right one is a Mac Galactic. I love that strain. It's so good. I think who was it that we got it from?
Denver Spore Company. Shout out
Yeah.
to Eric.
And you know, we worked that one for a while, and there's the thick caps on it, and it's really nice and fibrous, but it like actually dries out pretty well, even though it's pretty dense. So that's a really, really good strain.
Yeah.
And then the bottom left there looks like our white Billy
Hillbilly.
or hillbilly.
Nice. Yeah, the bottom right kind of looks like Maquila Gorilla or DC Mac 95. And what I love about, you know, whatever, I feel like, right, the cube genetics, they can play just so many games. There is ultimately a finite number of combinations, but this one seems to manifest itself in a couple different ways.
Mhm.
And what I love about it is it's surprisingly potent, even though it's a big fruit.
Yep.
And like you said, fibrous, dense, I think never hollow, or almost like if
Mhm.
like you can tell maybe it kind of wants to get hollow sometimes, but for the most part, that's a really great variety to use if you just want to extract as much biomass out of that first flush as you possibly can. I don't find them flushing too hard in subsequent flushes. So,
Mhm.
you know, you can play the game of, do you want to do 2, 3, 4, 5 flushes and get your badge from Shroomery or whatever for doing a lot of flushes? I don't. I like to one and done it. I like stuff that makes me happy first flush. So yeah,
No,
that's great.
I agree. Like, so the way that we do our ratio is we do a 1-to-3 ratio of grain to sub. And I think that if you're new, 1-to-1 ratios are perfect. They're great. They run quicker and you don't have to worry about contamination. But I think that when you really start playing around with the different ratios, you know, less grain means more water. Maybe that means bigger fruit. And especially with like the Mac Galactics, we've found the same thing. You know, we'll have an 8-pound block and that thing will produce 4 pounds wet weight.
Oh
And it's
yeah.
like,
Oh yeah.
dang, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, and just think about mushrooms in the wild, right? Like they're doing their best work after a real big rain. After a real big rain, usually followed by a warm front that comes in that then rapidly evaporates. So the mycelium go, wait a minute, we were having a good time. Holy shit, now we're drying out. Throw fruit out, right? So yeah, having I'm the 3-to-1 is pretty much the way to go. There are other cultigens varieties that can play ball with a lot less. There are cultigens that 1-to-1 do not like that. They will let you know, thirsty Melmax and stuff like that. You know, the 1-to-1 is a recipe for not getting full maturation on the fruit. You just can't go wrong with 3-to-1. You really can. I feel like that is probably the magic ratio. It's
I
worth
feel
playing games with other ratios, but yeah, 3-to-1 is
FAFO.
yeah, gotta have something to do. Once you grow these mushrooms, you gotta have games to play. But yeah, 3-to-1 seems to be the perfect balance to allow the genetic to do all the things that it wants to do, morphologically speaking. So I'm with you on 3-to-1. Now, do you guys ever get into cake depth games?
So we've been doing more stuff with exotics in the past year, and that's really like the big thing, right? With exotics is cake depth. So with cubes, cubes, gourmets and stuff, I think that it really depends on your recipe and your genetics. So like I haven't found that cake depth really has a huge effect on cubes, but then you get into, pans and other stuff, and that's extremely important, right? They just haven't been worked for nearly as long. So yeah, I don't know. What have you found? Have you found that cake depth is a pretty big indicator?
Well, so when I first started, everybody said 3 to 4 inch cake, right? This is just 4 years ago, but that was pretty standard. And there were a lot of bulk growers growing in 66-quart tubs. And I was like, I'm just growing mushrooms for myself. I'm gonna grow 1 tub of mushrooms and be done for 2 years. Like this is a lot. So that was never gonna work for me. So in the beginning, I was closer to 3 inches. But man, I started playing around in bags, especially because it'll retain the moisture in the cake a little bit more readily. The surface area, evaporation ratio, it goes up if you have a thinner cake. But I could get down to like 3/4 of an inch to an inch and still get a relatively nice flush. Now, they're not as tall, they're not as proud as if you have a thicker cake for sure. But I have absolutely, it's just not worth mixing up that much additional substrate and grain for me, for whatever slight improvement in first flush yield I might get.
Yeah, I think what you said there is pretty important too, right? Like I think with your cake depth, your fruit can get really, really tall and really, really big. And sometimes that can affect dehydration times. So if you're looking for more of the like small traditional stuff, then, I would say like use less. But sometimes we might have like a 6 to 8 inch deep cake. So we really like the tall and the thick boys. But yeah, people like to do different things.
Yeah, again, this goes to like, what are you growing these for? What's the end goal? All that stuff, right? Like ODPE is a real fun one to grow. I don't think it bangs that hard. I don't think it's like anybody's favorite experience. But it dries them. I mean, it just dries like a charm. It's got the bag appeal if somebody's, trying to entice people, by how the dried fruit look. So it has that quality for it. Whereas like the lower right corner, anything that looks like that, the DC Mac line, Makilla Gorilla, stuff like that, it also dries, like you said, really well. It doesn't take forever to dry. Some of them, you're like, oh my God, is this fucking thing ever gonna dry? They dry well, but they're just too damn big. So I always find myself cutting them at least in half lengthwise, sometimes even quartering them if I get like a 200-300 gram fruit. So yeah, I'm with you. Like, sure, it's fun to go look at how big this fruit is and get a pat on the back from people that think that's a big deal. But um, once you get over all that, then there's sort of a size of fruit that you like. You start thinking about how does this dehydrate and keep? I love Jack Frost. I love basic cubes. They work real well, but they fall apart like that.
Mhm.
So I personally like fruit that dries in a durable way. And these are, all things that once you get past your first flush and you start playing games, these are the things I think more people start thinking about, like what they care about and all that.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that gill strength, cap strength, right? Like when we grow hillbilly, the caps are very brittle. You
Can't
drop
even
that
look at
thing,
them.
Right.
yeah, you drop it on the table and that thing just falls apart, right? But like you said, with the ODPE or the Mac Galactic, I mean, those
Uh-huh.
are durable fruit.
Oh
And
yeah.
looking for ideal morphologies like that, I think is really important. Also, like if you're looking at the gills, right? The gills on Mac Galactic are great. They don't
Oh
really
yeah.
fall apart when you're
Nope.
trying to swab them. So I don't
Yep.
have to worry as much about getting tissue. I
Oh
can
yeah. Yeah.
confidently
You can
say,
be even a
mm,
little rough. Yeah.
mhm.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's, like, especially when you get into like the breeding and other things, like the gills will start to do weird things. So you're like, okay, do I want this
Yeah.
weird gilled thing or do I want the more traditional one that's a little bit easier to take swabs from?
Right.
So like all of those things go into account, when you're taking things forward generations and maybe you start to see changes, it's like, okay, this thing's super brittle now. Maybe we go back to the previous generation and try and rework it so that we get those strong gills instead.
It'd be interesting. God, we should create like a consortium of people to do this. I think it would be cool to start thinking about some of these cultigens, almost like people think about dogs for like breed standards. You know how they're when they
Mhm.
evaluate these different breeds of dogs, they're sort of like the imaginary perfect version of that breed.
Mhm.
I think it would be interesting to put thought into that. I think that happens a little more haphazardly and accidentally. Um, but it would be cool just to imagine, like, what are the different based on the things we've seen, and the games that we know Cubensis can do,
Mhm.
is there sort of like a goal? So, for example, is Makilla Gorilla perfect as is, or is there some little trait we'd like to eke out from it? Can you make Jack Frost still look as angelic and beautiful as it is? But is there a way to make it, have a little less body load or a little more, whatever you're looking for? I
Mhm.
think that would be hopefully an eventuality for the space of really getting into perfecting some of these classic morphologies that we like.
Yeah, and like what does perfect mean, right? Because when you look at dog breeding, a lot of these dogs have been like overbred, right? So you get to these, weak
No
hips,
pugs.
imperfections.
Yes,
Yeah.
no, we want no pugs.
The
Yes.
what is it? Brachycephalic nose.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yes.
was a veterinary technician for a while. That's where like I
You
learned
know, you
all this
know.
stuff. But
You
yeah,
know
yeah, I
all
mean,
about overbreeding. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like, I think you see it in the mushroom space as well, right? Like maybe somebody really likes it, but it's a little bit less than ideal. But maybe, for them, that's what they want.
Right.
So,
The
Yeah.
Frenchy cubensis.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Or there are some, if you've ever grown Casper, it's slow as a motherfucker. I mean, it's almost as slow as Enigma is. Sure, it's real potent, but is it worth it? If you actually run the math on it, is it? I could grow 17 tubs of basic cubes and clearly have more psilocybin at the end of the day and a great trip. Is it worth that? So, yeah,
Mhm.
I think all this stuff you got to start evaluating overall, like how do you perfect it? Yes.
Mhm.
What does that mean to perfect it? What is the goal? Okay, fine. This strain doesn't seem like it's ever going to be that potent. That's fine. Is there other value that we can eke out of it? Is there a way of crossing it with something that is more potent? How close can we then, back cross to get something that approximates that morphology but with improved potency by doing that stuff?
Mhm.
Lots of games we're not playing yet for sure.
Yeah, yeah, time to fruiting is a really important one because, we want stuff that's going to fruit within a reasonable time. And, like our Toke F8 nerds, for example, is not that. That thing takes forever, but it's a really good strain to try and breed with if you can get spores from it or do diamond crossing with it. Right. So I think that there's like, maybe some of these slower strains, and they're novelty, but they can also have other uses, even if it takes a long time for it to grow out.
Worth noting, we got Enigma down from like 45 days to 30, 35 days. So that's also another area.
Full colonization in 14 days, and then 14 more days to fruit.
I like it. Now, have you tested it? Has that affected the potency, though?
A little bit. So when we originally got it, it was up at around 2%, and now it's closer to 1.7%. So a little bit. I think that definitely like time and density seems to have some kind of effect on it. But yeah, like you said, it depends on what you're looking for, right?
But also, I think that doesn't mean that it's not valuable. There are new growers that will not succeed at growing Enigma, a traditional Enigma strain. If you have a faster fruiting Enigma, you put Enigma, into the realm of reach sooner for somebody. They get to decide what they think about that, the alkaloid profile, all that stuff, and then that can lead to growing a more traditional version of that. So
and that's really what we like have based our company around, right? Is like we want people to grow, and we want people, not just like mushrooms, but also like personally. And when you make things more accessible, whether it's liquid culture, all-in-one bags, with good directions, whatever it is, then you have less likelihood of failure and that person walking away and being disheartened.
100%, man. Yes. You gotta, it's to me, this community is different than just being into parasailing or skiing or mountain biking, right? They're just sports. They're just physical recreational activities. Some people can get obsessed and make it their whole life for sure. But there's no like radical social implications. No one is going, if only more people mountain biked, we could, run our governments better. We could humanity would be an improved version of themselves. Nobody's saying that. But in our space, there's a belief that this medicine can have a profound impact on society. And so attracting people that are interested, and keeping them here through success early on is a strategy that has a purpose. It is a noble strategy to want, if somebody is interested, to want to actually cater to the new grower, have them get success, have them enjoy the fruits of their labor, and then decide, how much further into this they want to get.
Yeah, exactly.
Couldn't agree more.
We all have our own lives and hobbies, and not everybody's going to be able to sterilize or make their own grain or substrate. So it's nice having an option at every stage, so that, maybe I want to dip my toes in and see how it is. Maybe I like it, maybe I don't. But hopefully you have a good experience so that you don't walk away being like, this was awful. I don't want to do it again.
Yeah. I had a guy, I don't know, 3 months ago, maybe somewhere around there, tell me, brand new, been watching your show. I think I'm ready for my first grow. I went and I sourced some ape genetics from your buddy, Fungi Mycology. And my first, I turned into one of those people. I was like, bad move. Don't do that. Your first grow apes. That's not where I would start. I don't encourage that. Shelve that culture, start with some basic cubes. Didn't listen to me, and sent me later some pictures of a pretty decent flush of cubes. And I'm like, oh, it's a new era. There is that much information out. If people know how to follow a fucking recipe and listen and pay attention, there will be people who out of the gate can grow what used to be considered, a much harder to grow fruit. So yeah, definitely.
It's nice to have a lower barrier to entry, and then from there anybody can go a little more in depth.
Exactly. Yeah, man. All right, so let's look at some more of these bags. All right, top left. I like that creamy look teasing me behind the cloudiness of that bag there. What is that?
So that one looks like Z strain. So
Okay.
again, that was like the first one that we ever got and started working. And I mean, it's a great strain. Like
Oh yeah.
it works really, really well. It's very hardy. And yeah, I mean, you just get a bajillion of them inside of a bag.
You do. Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, man. Some of these classics, right? People these days, oh, B plus. I'm like, go take 2 grams of B plus and tell me if that attitude's appropriate. Like, there's a
Yeah.
reason some of these classics are classics. Like, don't get it twisted. The old basic cubes that have been around forever that are well known strains, there is something definitely to them. They still work. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I had one of like my most challenging psychedelic experiences on 3.5 grams of Z strain. And it like, you know, it was very informative, but it smacked me across the face.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, top right there, it looks like we've got more ODPE, and that's in the T filter bag, the XL, not the XLS, the 10T. 10T.
0.2s, yeah. The smaller bags are 0.2 microns. That one
Wow,
on the
that's
left and that one in the middle is
fascinating.
0.2.
So you choke the hell out of these then.
Yes.
So you don't slit these bags. You don't anything. You really you just mean. You're mean. You're mean.
Our
to
yeah.
ODPE. Wow.
Our goal is to, you know, to have these work in as many environments as possible. And so kind of going back to what we talked about, the stress, right? Like when you're in a 10T bag, most things don't work the first few times. So you really have to, you know, take a clone, then take those successive generations back to spore. And then you start to get more and more success. And some strains, they just don't like the 10Ts. And you know, just don't put that in like an all-in-one bag or something, but you can still train it and they will still, you know, be good genetics that work in other environments.
That's fascinating too. It's exactly what you talked about. That there are you finding that consistent that when you choke out that strain, it does produce significantly larger fruits.
That seems to be a trend, is larger, more fibrous fruits, which can be really good, but sometimes your already fibrous fruit becomes even more fibrous.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
instead of 24 hours drying, it takes like 48.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's, you know, good things and bad things. You get taller, more fibrous fruits. Generally, the more that you choke it out is what we've found. But also,
Yes, I
go ahead.
wonder if that's related to just some good old fashioned like how these things work in the wild, where if right if they're choked out more in the wild, there's maybe a denser leaf litter above them.
Mhm.
So in order to break through that leaf litter, it has to create a larger fruit body, right?
Yeah, that makes a
Maybe
lot of
that
Great
sense.
maybe
observation. Yeah.
that's even what's going on. But the more we start thinking about all this stuff, so not even starting to go, if you do this, this happens, but then start asking ourselves, well, why might that be the case? Do we see that mirrored in nature? Man, when we can really understand what happens and why, then these games get even more interesting than yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you have strains popping up through like concrete and stuff, right? So mushrooms can be extremely strong when they need to be in the right environment.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, man, you ever have a fruit grow completely upside down? I
Mhm.
had ODPE do this actually to stay on topic without even meaning to. Completely upside down. So the top of the stipe was just like perfectly rounded over.
Mhm.
But what the most fascinating part, well, no, the most fascinating part was just that it grew upside down and made no sense to me and blew my mind. I kept asking Ed Grain to explain it to me, and he just was like, I don't fucking know why it grew upside
Mhm.
down. But what was fascinating was it wasn't like a branched, right? The traditional way the mycelium comes up and creates that stipe or that pin that then evolves into the full stipe. It was the tiniest little point. So when I went to pick it, it's like, what's going to be under there? It just effortlessly came off, and there's just this like almost pin-sized starting point for the whole thing. I was like, did it just like read its DNA information backwards and then just made was it following a blueprint backwards or something? I
Mhm.
mean, I didn't get to watch it. That was a bag I didn't look at until it was ready and then I happened to see it. But yeah, that just shows you how little that pipeline is to affect so much mushroom tissue. It's crazy.
That's another cool thing about the higher CO2 environments is that you do see a lot more of these weird things, you know, like a fruit fruiting upside down on top of another fruit, or you get like the weird Snoopy mushrooms where it's kind of like drooping down from the cap. There are what we've seen is a higher incidence of those kinds of things. And, you know, it's because it's getting choked out, right? So it's trying to do what it can. And sometimes it can't form that perfect mushroom, so it does like a little weird thing, right? And then you can actually sometimes carry that forward, which is really cool because, you know, you start in that high CO2 in order to induce a blob or something weird, and then you make that normal.
Normalizing weirdness. Love it. I'm all about that. Yes. Yeah, for sure. All right. So
Middle left here,
what
I
else we
think.
got here?
So middle left, we have the that's a Casper. And then
Damn, dude, that's probably the best looking Casper bag I've ever seen. I have not. This is how I know what you're talking about. You're telling me the fucking truth. Because typically I tell everybody grow Casper in a tub, don't grow it in a bag. Everything I did in bags never looked great, but I never fell in love with it and said my whole goal is to make it grow in a bag. This is how I know you guys are doing what you're talking about.
Yeah, we really like Casper. It's one of those strains that seems to do really well in the XLSBs. And, you know, most of the time we're getting those full flushes. And, you know, you always get bunk stuff, but it's one of those very consistent strains that we've been working for a while.
We're testing it now again in bags, so we'll send you some pictures, Geeky.
Nice.
And then middle right there is just a lighter color Mac Galactic. That's another thing that you'll start to see in a higher CO2 environment is pigmentation kind of sometimes goes away or changes. Yeah. And I think, again, it's just like it's getting choked out. So maybe it doesn't have as much energy to put into pigmentation in some cases, and that energy goes elsewhere. And then, do you want to talk about the myco bag?
Yeah, at the bottom, Hillbilly, Mac Galactic, and CT in order from left to right. This project is something we have going on in Spain, actually. So we have partners in Spain that are making these grow kits available throughout Europe through some distributors there. Historically, there's been, you know, over 20 years of people purchasing grow kits, growing their own mushrooms at home. There's a huge community for foraging, definitely less mycophobia, more engraved in their culture, mushrooms. So we were lucky enough to partner with some friends out there to bring our genetics out there through this brand called Myco Bag. So these are just pictures of some bags that were grown out there with the genetics that we chose. Some of the genetics that do best in that high CO2 environment in 0.2 micron filters. So the left is Hillbilly, middle is that Mac Galactic, and then the right is the Cascadian Teacher.
All right, so I got a couple questions. All right, so you guys put out a basically a all-in-one grow bag. Are people inoculating this? Is it already spawned? Are they buying a spawn block?
That's an interesting question. We wanted to do the syringe and all-in-one just because that's what we're used to here. We also like to mitigate risk as much as possible for ourselves and the customers. The distributors over there kept telling me, right, like, look, we're going to try what you want to try, but what people want here is fully colonized, ready to fruit.
They don't want to do any work?
They're
Are you serious? What?
It's not our fault. Maybe you could blame the company that's historically been selling the kits there, but no, yeah, I mean, they want quicker time to fruit. They don't want to wait. And I mean, if you can call inoculating a bag work, they don't want to do that little piece either. So
they will. Yeah. I mean, shit, I don't want to buy green bananas and sit for 3 weeks waiting for them to turn yellow. I want ripe bananas. Yeah.
Right.
I get that.
So we tried to release the all-in-one bags, and you know, the demand wasn't there. They wanted the ready-to-fruit bags. So,
but the 0.2 micron, this decision interests me. So is this because they found less overall contamination? Were they trying other filter sizes? different.
That's honestly based on what we were doing here, and we were doing that
So they
here.
just rolled with it. Okay.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and also for the all-in-one bags, because when you do an all-in-one bag, then you have to wait for it to fully colonize before it fruits. So you want that lower micron to avoid any contamination. Over there,
Yeah.
they're being sold as fully colonized, right? So you control more of that environment before selling it. But yeah, for now it's point two. We're thinking about doing different bags so that other genetics. I mean, these genetics and others could thrive more easily in
Yeah. Yeah.
higher filter size.
If they're selling them fully spawned, fully colonized, at that point you got some vigor with the cake, right? You could probably go 0.5.
Yeah,
Mhm.
When you said you guys were messing with the bees, the 5 microns, I was like, man, everybody know who. I never even messed with it because everybody who told me said, contaminate's too high, don't mess with it. Just cut some slits in your bag if you need more air.
We heard the same thing.
But
we've even done that for grain, the 5 micron filter,
Mhm.
and what
and it
was your
works.
experience?
It
And it
worked
works.
perfectly fine. I think
So what's wrong? What are these? What's wrong with these people? And where did this come from? See, this is what you get for not figuring it out yourself. Your point from earlier. Yeah.
I think there's just a lot of old information and assumptions, I think is the biggest thing, right? Like, again, you trust but verify, right? So when we do grain in XLSB bags, like they work perfectly fine and we don't see contamination, in our environment where we're at. Um,
Do you
so yeah,
think?
yeah,
Hold on. Do you think that maybe? Because man, this whole little situation got me thinking. Do you think that some nerdy motherfucker just said, well, 5 microns, I can name 4 pathogenic airborne contaminants that could slip through there? That's stupid. Don't, like, they never actually FAFO'd it themselves. They just said it, and they said it with such confidence that everybody said, well, there you go. Just don't use bees. They're
we
too big. Shit.
we had that exact conversation with somebody where we brought up what we were doing in XLSBs for fruiting, and they were like, well, if you're going from a 0.5 micron to a 5 micron, it's like going from a scooter to a 18 wheeler.
Right.
And we were already doing this, so we were like, okay, like you can have that opinion, but in our experience, that is not the case. And I think a lot of that also just goes into grain prep, right? If your grain prep is not down, then maybe an XLSB isn't what you want to do. But when you're confident in your grain prep and you know that it's properly hydrated and you know that it's properly sterilized, I mean, I think you can do, colonizing grain in
Wow.
much dirtier environments,
We were
right?
told a 5 micron would let a Mack truck through it.
Right. Now, so okay, so if the bees work, then what? Why the push for the 0.2s? What's the rationale for why you want to give
That's
yourself more work?
That's what we use in grain bags, so that's what
Okay.
we have readily available, and, as soon as stuff started working in the tea filters, which are those 0.2s, we were like, "Well, this works. It's, less contamination." There's a lot of logistics, right? When we're talking about Spain, there's a lot of logistics about, stuff moving around. So having a bit smaller of a filter for the time being is good, but we
Okay.
will probably ease up on that as time moves on.
It was also the size of the bag. So the point 2 bags, the total size of that cake is 3 pounds, right? The
Okay.
5 micron bags are significantly bigger. So those bags are closer to
Right,
8 pounds.
because it's all those sizings all based on like commercial mushroom farming practices from unicorn and all that stuff. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yep. Yeah. A lot of what you see here is the XLSBs. So those are going to be those 8 pound, 2 pounds of grain, 6 pounds of substrate. But all of those ones at the bottom there are tea filters. 10 teas is the bag size and filter.
Gotcha. I like that, man. That's cool. All right. Tell you what, it's been a hot minute since I've gotten excited talking about some of this stuff. It does, you can talk about drippy corn just so long. So this is fun. I'm definitely digging this.
Mhm.
All right, what do we got here?
So at the top left, we've got albino penis and V revert. That was actually the second strain that we got, and that one absolutely hated bags. And we worked that thing for so long, took so many clones of that thing before it got to work. And now it's like one of the best ones we have. It's
Hmm.
amazing. Like if you just like keep with it, some things you just got to get rid of, but like there are some that it's not working, and then it just works and it keeps working. But yeah, that's the top left one. The middle one at the top there is a Cascadian teacher. Two different Cascadian teachers. I believe one of those was spore and one of those was a clone, and we were just saying like which one was more consistent. Both of them were pretty good. Uh, at the top right there, I think that one is Avery. It looks like Avery to me. And then yeah, we've got kind of like a combo picture there at the bottom left, where you've got Enigma there in the front, and then immediately behind it to the right is Halo Gates. To the left, it looks like ODPE that hasn't quite gotten to where it needs to get. And then at the top left is Hillbilly. Immediately to the right of that is Aper, Albino Penis and V Revert. And that
I can't tell that one either.
yeah, it's hard for me to tell from
Okay.
from here. And then yeah, we've got more of the myco bags. You can just see like how they produce in the bag. It's nice, and you've got like a full flush over there on the right. The middle one looks like it still needs to fruit out, and then on the left it looks like you've got some fruits coming in there. So like they do pretty well.
Nice.
And then
Now, so so are they doing a two-step process? Are they basically spawning to bulk in the factory wherever they're doing this at, colonize, ship?
Yeah, so
Okay.
the logistics is a little complex, right? 'Cause
Yeah,
it goes
that's what
from
I'm interested in, because that seems like maybe kind of a nightmare.
from the place the bags are made, they have to go to a distributor. Um, in between that, they might have to get fridged. Then they go in a truck to the distributor where they do get fridged, and then they get distributed to the finish client. So it's been, yeah, that's been an interesting test to do. Definitely added stress, which helps why our genetics are a little more stress resistant.
There you go.
And then in the middle there to the right, those myco bags, you can also see the middle is a 3-pound bag, and on the right you have a 1-pound bag. So that's something we released because it's something that you were mentioning, Geeky, right? Is like you thought you grew one tub and you would have enough for a couple of years. In this case, it was similar. Like these bags are producing 50 grams dry. So for your average person, they don't have to come back for another year. So
that's more than enough trips for the average person. Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah, even if you got a couple friends. So
It's
Now,
also
smaller
have you
bags.
have you guys figured out, so you basically have doubled the weight of the block? Are you doubling the yield off the first flush? Or is the small bag percentage wise like banging a little bit harder on that first flush than the bigger bag?
So they're actually different filter bags too. So the 1-pound ones are 4Bs, and that center one is a 10T, right? So they just like act a little bit different because when you have a 1-pound bag, it's extremely tall. And because it's so tall, having that larger filter is really nice because it allows more like penetration of the oxygen into the bag versus the 10T. The cake is a little bit closer to the filter by default.
Yeah.
So it's fine to have that like T filter because as it comes through, it doesn't have to travel as far.
Right.
So, but as far as your question about the yield, you have your 1-pound and your 3-pound, and the 3-pound bags. Generally, people will get at least like an ounce of dry weight, and in the 1-pound ones, it can be a little bit less, right? Like maybe what is that? I can't remember. It's like
the 3-pound's closer to 56 grams, so closer to 2 ounces, and then the one is like 30 grams, 20 to 30 grams. So it's not that 1-to-1 difference in weight. Like the ones put out more weight, more biological efficiency.
This is a thing I try to talk to newbies about because they see these big tubs and they want to grow in a 32-quart tub or a 66-quart tub, and I'm like, bro, even a 6-quart shoebox is big when you start getting good at this. Like,
yeah, kind of biting off more than you can chew. Like
Yeah.
for a lot of people, the 3-pound bag, they're like, what do I do with all of these
you're
mushrooms?
immediately trying to offload your fruit on your first flush. Yes, 100%.
Yeah, and then if we get down into the bottoms, those are just a bunch of ODPEs at the bottom 3 pictures on the left, and then on the right is a lion's mane that we grew in a Santee filter. So it literally just top fruited and it crawled up the entire way to the filter, and you can see those two little fruits there at the top. That is where the filter was.
Oh, cool.
So it's interesting. Like for gourmet fruits, it's kind of the same thing, right? Like people think that you need lower oxygen, but these things have been worked for forever. So they will grow in crazy environments.
I actually used to grow a decent amount of lion's mane, and I always let it top fruit because all I was doing was drying it and putting it in my microdoses as like a little extra something. If you don't, if you're not selling it to eat, I don't think there's necessarily any reason to go through the exhaustive process of, these big 5-pound, 10-pound blocks, putting them in a special, highly conditioned Martha. Yeah, man, top fruit those suckers. They will do what they're supposed to.
Yeah, I love top fruiting lion's mane. You just get like smaller balls that are a little bit easier to chop up versus all of those tendrils, which can be like, if you don't know exactly what to do with them, it can be a little bit harder to like figure out, as you're cutting it, you have all of these little things popping up and then they cook a little bit more unevenly.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right. Ooh, these are.
Yeah,
Man,
then
the myco bags, we didn't even know. This is going to be all you Europeans watching this show. You guys are going to be running out getting you some myco bags. These all look fantastic, man.
That was the cool thing when we were at MAPS in 2023. The amount of people from Europe that were walking through the events and talking to us about genetics was really, really cool. I feel like we talked to as many Europeans as we did people here in the States.
Nice.
But yeah, it looks like a Cascadian teacher there at the top left and in the middle. And then it looks like a Mac Galactic in the top right there. And that's a sealed bag in the 10T. And then we've got, I think, what is that? Is that White Billy or is that?
I would call the middle left ODPE.
ODP? Okay, gotcha. Yeah, some of those waves got me a little confused. And then, yeah, on the right there, it looks like another albino Gumby.
I think that one's albino Bluey Vuitton.
Albino Bluey Vuitton, okay. And then you take the bottom two there.
White Billies. That's an easy one. Spoon making the easy ones. Yeah, those are White Billies, which I think, again, the high CO2 environment is cost of pigmentation of hillbilly to change. We try to not get crazy with name changing. We try to never really change any names just because of the different morphology. So in this case, the biggest change we've done is from hillbilly to White Billy.
I like it. Yeah, every time I go through a major life change, I just change my name just to make things complicated. Yeah, not a good idea.
Well, I'll keep more albino blueies on the top. Again, just something we've been working for probably, I think we got this one initially over a year ago and just been working it for bags. The middle left is ODPE, just showing the difference in size between the 8-pound bag and the 5-micron and the 1-pound bags. Again, different intentions there if you want to grow different quantities. Same picture without the bag. So you can see the picture in a fully sealed bag versus when we cut the bag around the bottom to harvest. And then I know the back there is albino Louis Vuitton, bottom left. I want to say the front is also albino Louis Vuitton in a 1-pound bag. The middle, long white clouds.
Yeah, it looks like long white clouds right there.
And then the bottom right is actually a customer that sent us that picture of their albino Louis Vuitton bag. We did like a super limited release to some close people to give us feedback. Wanted to test more than anything like logistics, shipping, so on and so forth. And so that was a picture we received back from a customer.
I like it. Let me tell you, first thing I can tell by the photos that you're taking your time with these. You're giving them the love and attention they deserve. In the Tinder grinder, whatever these things are that I'm too old to have ever experienced, right? Where you're just swiping left and right, you're just not giving any thought to anybody. You go on one date, you have sex, you leave them, you go to the next person.
Give me 1 second.
You guys are you guys are playing a different game. You guys are giving these cultigens your full attention. You're really trying to figure some stuff out about them. You're really you're devoted to some of these cultigens. I like that. I really appreciate that.
We appreciate that feedback, Geeky. As you can tell from Spoon talking, you can tell the passion spews out of him, and he's somebody who enjoys reading, but also FAFO. And yeah, together it's been a priceless opportunity to be able to test way more than anything we could have ever done alone.
That's very cool. All right, let's pull up some other some of your other stuff here. I think at this point we've seen the fruits of your labor. Let's see where you're working, how you're putting those fruits together.
So this is top left, one of the first bag grows that we did. That was in that open Martha when we would cut around the bottom of the bag when it was fully colonized. The environment was the whole tent or room that it was in.
Right.
And that one is Z strain, one that was one of our most rigorous strains. On the right is one, probably the second or third lab that Spoon and I built out together. That flow hood was probably the second large flow hood that we built. So we bought the filter and then built out that wooden frame, put a fan on the top. That one was a workhorse. It's one of the best flow hoods we've had.
Yeah. And I think like building that flow hood, like we talked about earlier, was super important, but also that flow hood was like used. And when we got it, it had like oil on the bottom right. And we still use that thing for almost 3 years, and it was perfectly fine. So we just did like a real deep clean on it and everything, and we were really worried, but then we got to using it, and it was great.
So that's like the true laminar flow. That's, you got the corrugated aluminum channeling and all that stuff, right? I think that's worth mentioning. Of course, most people cannot, they don't have the room for something with a deep plenum like that, like those, you know, the old Myers mushroom, you know, instructions on how to build those. Most people can't do that. They got to use just a regular Mac 10 style FFU. But to be fair, the FFU is not a true laminar flow. It does not have that corrugated channeling. So that means, and I've taken mine apart. I see how the baffling system and all that works. I put an anemometer on it. I know that it's weakest in the center and strongest on the edges. So if you are working too close to the end of that, you do not have true laminar flow coming off of that. So you have a faster air velocity, and then you got your dead air next to it. It can create a little turbulence, and if you tend to work on the edge of your flow hood, you can get yourself in a little bit of trouble. So this is where, if you have the space and the money, or somebody wants to sell you, because everybody these days is trying to get rid of their old big, you know, plywood flow hood. If you can use one of those things and you got the space for it, they're amazing. Yeah, they're high quality. That's cool. You guys have some of those.
Yeah, they were fantastic.
That middle left is one of the Martha tents that we built out. It was like close to 10 by 10. And that was all a design that my buddy Mike, that first showed me his tent, helped us build. It's all PVC with plastic around it. So we build the tent itself. You see a little middle piece there dropping, which is where the air duct was in the basement we were working in. So we had to get creative with it. But yeah, that was good times with that Martha. And then on the right, it's another Martha that's a tent that was purchased, right? So it's like similar logic, just different materials. That picture to the right is October 2022. That's when we first got our 150 liter autoclave.
Biggest mistake of your life, huh?
Similar to the flow hoods. That's what changed our life.
Game
yeah, I mean,
changer.
Yeah, big time. And that's a SH Scientific.
Bro, I'm ready. Oh, they're the best. Yeah,
Yeah,
my
shout
buddy's
out to
got one.
JH.
Yeah, they're the best. I forget that guy's name, but
JH.
JH. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want one. I wish I had a spare couple grand to go buy one, but man,
Yeah, that was a
I
big
don't know
savings on our
anybody
part.
that regretted buying one of those things. I just get
Amazing.
calls like, bro, oh my God, they're laughing like giddy school children. Oh my God, you wouldn't believe I can fit an entire van inside this thing. You wouldn't believe how much great. Yeah. Yep.
We actually got a 300-liter one, and we regretted it because this 150-liter is so much easier to load and unload. You know, obviously it fits less, but just the time it takes to load and unload the 300, we would go
Oh,
for
it's like a
150s all
commitment.
day.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
whole nother level of commitment. Sometimes you don't need to run that whole thing, but yet then you're going to pay to heat it up and all that. So I think 150, maybe 200 if you're a guy like Howard over at Booming Acres and you're just doing crazy, crazy high volume. Maybe you can get away with a 200.
I think even he's got a couple of 150s instead of having
yeah,
a
yeah.
larger 300, which is smart.
The 150 seems to be a nice size for sure.
Yeah.
And
And
let me ask you about that middle picture. So these are all blocks of cubes. So, but they look like they're still in the bag. So, are you what relative humidity are you trying to keep that tent at with your bagged fruit?
So I think that this was when we were cutting out the filters.
Okay.
We hadn't,
All right.
yeah, we hadn't quite transitioned to full in-bag fruiting yet, and we were still like figuring out, like, okay, like we can just cut out the filter, and it does even better than it being just regularly top fruited. So yeah, in there you basically have one of those oil heaters. You have a humidifier that you can't see, but it's over in the corner that we made. And it basically shoots out into the middle of the tent where it disperses everything. And then we had an exhaust coming out one side out of a window.
To answer your question, though,
makes sense now. The minute you just said, "Oh, it was when we were cutting the filters off."
To answer your question, now our biggest worry is just making sure the bags don't lose humidity, right? The environment's within the bag, and mainly during colonization, because then you could see a little bit of side pinning without any pinning in the middle, which is the first area to lose moisture. So we keep the room at around 60% humidity. Now that room was probably like closer to 90.
Yeah, just a regular evaporative humidifier rather than one of these ultrasonic ones that gets everything wet. So it's nice.
Yeah, I got that just for my house. They're nice. The filters get a little crunchy when they get old, but yeah, they're superior way to do it, I think, because then also if you're using that for mushrooms, it's moving air in a good way as well.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, definitely like that. Now that's interesting though. I think this is something that also a lot of newer growers are not thinking about. And the first time the conversation comes up is when they go through a winter, especially somewhere where it gets real cold and it gets real dry. And then they realize, oh, everything's drying out too fast. Everything's stalling. My fruit started to grow and then it just stopped. Why did it stop growing, Geeky? Well, give me a real close up of that. Let me see what that cake looks like, or let me see that. Show me some more pictures. And sure enough, if you go from 35 to 45% relative humidity and you don't change your tech up at all, and then you go to 17 to 19% relative humidity, your cake will dry out more rapidly. So you have to make adjustments. I think in general, this idea of, oh, well, because dude, you just said this, and I'm like, oh, I never thought about this. So if you're, and I pack the crap out of my bags because I'm trying to fight that problem of the first flush not coming away from, like I'm literally trying to almost stretch the bag a little bit so that it keeps its shape. But yeah, if you don't do that, if you're running some stuff where you feel like you don't want to pack it too densely, it can definitely start coming off the walls, and then you get of course, that's the perfect place for the mushrooms. That's where they all want to go, those damn annoying side pins. But I love the idea of juicing up the humidity a little bit. Slow it down. Slow it down. Yes. I like that.
A lot of people, I think that the bag is like completely insulated, but you do have that filter. So even if you're not losing water out of the filter, you can still dry out the middle of your cake. And then, maybe that water gets drank up by the mycelium, or maybe it does go out the filter. So, yeah, like having that relative humidity a little bit higher is really important.
Dig it. I dig it. All right. And then shelves. This is how you know you really grow mushrooms is the minute somebody, I had a buddy just message me the other day. He's like, look, I finally got a stainless steel table on one of those rack shelves that you got. And I'm like, all right, it's getting real now. Got to have the shelves, all about the shelves.
Yeah, those two bottom pictures are just FAFO. That's really it.
Those plastic shelves are nice, but you got to watch out because there's like a little nipple that pops up in the middle. And if you're just dragging the bag out, you'll puncture the bottom and then grain goes everywhere.
Or so you've heard.
Yeah.
Never. Yeah, just so you've heard. Yeah. Yeah, man. I want to like the plastic. I got plastic in my Martha, but I actually don't. I think I'd rather have metal, all metal.
Definitely. Yeah, the stainless steel is nice.
All right, here we go. Look at this. Getting even now the pictures are getting real sexy.
So the top more FAFO, that's just different tents that we've had testing out. In that bottom, that's the first time we get into a facility that we had last year. We can go into a whole story about this probably on a different podcast, but a lot of lessons learned there. We were looking to go into a volume play with supplies, probably a combination of tough timing that was early. Man, that was like 2 years ago, I want to say, a year plus.
2023-ish.
Yeah, 2023. So the market got very saturated all around. And also we found ourselves making that many grain bags and substrate bags and having less time in the lab to innovate and breed and so on and so forth. So that combined with also seeing what was happening in Oregon at a licensed in the regulated market, we were in that facility positioning ourselves to get licensing here in Colorado and ultimately decided against it. So we made a shift, moved out of that facility and started to focus more so on innovating in the lab, breeding, working the genetics, and establishing the partnerships like the one we were just mentioning in Spain. So adapt the business model a little bit.
Yeah, try something. Try yes, this is I forget what it's called. My wife was talking about how she's using it at work. But it's the idea that you can test an idea out. So instead of going, so everybody come up with their ideas, we're going to pick one and then we're going to just run it into the ground and hopefully it works. Instead of that, you can, it's like dabble testing, right? We're going to try this out. Does this feel right? Am I getting a little worried about something? Does it feel real good? Yeah, it's important to be able to make those decisions in a new, emerging, and ever evolving, dynamic, complicated, occasionally, and very chaotic market. Yeah, 100%.
That bottom right picture is worth noting. That's just our lawyer sweeping and mopping the facility. So I had to put that in there.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. Why you paying him $200 an hour to mop your floors? What's that all about?
No, he was not one of those hourly guys, luckily. As you can tell, because he's sweeping.
Yeah, that it's just another game. It's another business. It's another model. The priorities are different. Volume, revenue versus doing something really special, really attention to detail. Two completely different business models.
Yeah, massive respect to people like Howard at Booming Acres. Like we did this and we did not enjoy it. So him being able to do that day in and day out, I mean, props to him.
That's what I was going to say. I gained a lot of respect for the people that are doing this correctly at scale.
And it's a need. They're serving a need for sure. Yeah, it's like I lived in Detroit. I knew some guys that work for Ford and GM, and they're doing the same thing every day, all day, and they might be making $140K a year doing it and going home and not worrying about a goddamn thing. But I can't do that. Yeah, I also can't do that. So I feel you on that one. All right. What?
Just some
you
lab
guys-
pictures. Yeah, that's also the facility that we were at. So at the bottom left, you can actually see the autoclaves that we have, the 300 liter SH Scientific 150 and Lamb Fan 150. And then at the top, you just have different, areas for inoculation. The middle was the entrance. That was a pretty entrance. We have some of those epoxies behind us now, but that was just epoxied mushrooms, the poster and medals from the first Psychedelic Cup here in Denver. And then you have Spoon knocking up some bags.
Nice.
Yeah, with the long hair.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of that, let's pull up some of the awards here. You guys, you're on the show. You get to toot your own horn. So here we go.
Thank you. We're not good at this, so we appreciate it.
No, you got to win your wins. You got to Charlie Sheen the shit. Just own it. Own it. You did it. Own it.
Yeah. So do you want to grab the largest mushrooms back here?
Yeah.
So at the top left, we have our stuff from the 2023 Psychedelic Cup. So they had a bunch of different categories. So if I get this wrong, I'm sorry. But I believe that we had first place for cubensis category overall potency with the Toke F8 nerds, which is the picture at the top right. We had second place with that strain and that same strain for overall psilocybin in the cubensis category. And then we got third place for this fruit right here, which was a 1,016 gram fruit. It was, I think, 2.34 pounds. And this is a Melmac. So, I mean, this thing was like massive and it dried out to, I can't even remember. It was like maybe 90 grams or something. But yeah, that top right picture is our Toke F8 nerds. And, I think that, for people that don't know, I believe Tim Pig was the person that isolated the Toke F8, and then we got it from Blue Bear Mycology. He gave us a little clone of a little mutation that he got off of it. And when we grew it out, we had 3 different morphologies. We had the actual fruit, we had this enigma looking thing, and we had these nerds. And we'd never seen the nerds, so we ran with that. And we have since tested this strain like 10 different times for full tryptamine panels, and it consistently comes out at like 2 to 2.5% psilocybin. And then this year with the Toke F8 nerds, we also got first place for highest origination content. And origination, I think that kind of the jury's still out a lot on a lot of these minor alkaloids as to what they do. But when you read papers on origination, it appears to be the case that it maybe makes your experience much more calm and maybe a little bit more, not as like wavy. So I think that a lot of the people that have given us feedback on this one tell us that it's one of their best experiences. Now, the issues with it is that you literally have to have a knife to harvest this thing. It doesn't give you a crazy yield. So that's why we would put this more in like the breeding or novelty category, because it's an amazing strain, but it is just a pain. But yeah, so going to the 2024 Cup, we got first place for origination with the Toke F8 nerds. And then you can see in the left picture, we have our largest fruit for the Melmac for 2023. And then we have this one, which we won for largest fruit for 2024. And this is a white billy that weighed 950 grams wet. And when it dried out, I believe it was 54 grams dry. And then when we go to the picture on the right, that's our enigma. And all of these are epoxied by our guy, Epoxy Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he does a really good job with these. He just like epoxies them and they look beautiful. But this is enigma. This one got best in show and I can't remember. I think it was best blob and most unique for the cup this year as well. So that's like the Denver Psychedelic Cup. I think that the Denver Psychedelic Club does a really good job of putting on events, especially for like the local community. They get, different speakers out that, you just learn so much going to these events. So I really want to give props to them because their event in 2023 was amazing and their event in 2024 was also fantastic. and they do a really good job presenting and like, letting the community know, what's going on. And
Now, did you feel, because something I noticed, it seemed like that cup came about just at the right time. You got people moving over there. It seemed to be like a galvanizing event. It helped bring people together. It seemed to form some connections for some people who were there to try to do some stuff. Um, did you find that being there, you made some cool friends, some people that you could sort of become colleagues with and bounce ideas off of or hang out with, or just finally have someone you can hang out with in public and talk about mushrooms for 5 hours, without them getting mad?
Definitely a lot of good connections made. It's a pretty small community up here, so like we're aware of and know a lot of the people that are doing really, really good work. But it's cool because you get to see like your mom and pop like boomer come out that made a chocolate that they made this chocolate from like their grandparents that made it, and then they put it into an award-winning product. So like it's cool because people of all ages come out to this, and you just get to talk to people with different perspectives and different experiences and bounce ideas off of people. And we've had a few collaborations that have formed from meeting people at these events.
One thing that's interesting for this year, Triptomics is a lab that did it last year. They're doing it again this year, and instead of having to have a limited time window to put in your samples for the cup, this year they're receiving samples throughout the entire year. So anything they receive, they're gonna include in the cup.
I like that. Cool. I know after the first cup, they talked quite a bit about sample prep. Did you feel like going from 23 to 24, the competition got more fierce because people were preparing their samples correctly? Or did you at least feel like there weren't as many outliers or bad results? Like, did you notice an improvement from that education piece from 23?
I think that so in 2023 it was Altitude that did the testing, and in 2024 it was Triptomics. So they each have like a slightly different approach to how they did things. Altitude collected a lot more growing data, so it was cool at that event to see what they were able to parse from that. The barrier to entry was also a lot lower. It was $40 a sample, so they had a huge data set,
Right.
which was cool to see. But yeah, they presented things more so with a lot of the data that they got from people submitting their growing and drying and all of the different processes. Triptomics, you could put that information in if you wanted to, but it wasn't mandatory. So there wasn't as much of that information, but they did have some conclusions. I think that they have like a Patreon, or if you go on their Instagram, you can maybe go through and see some of that. But they just had a slightly different approach where they were more focused on like the numbers. There was more measuring of the minor alkaloids, and they have this leaderboard, which is really cool. You can go in and you can actually pull up a specific strain, and you can compare it to another strain, and you can do that with as many as you want. And
Cool.
it's like the just the way that they presented the data is slightly different. I think that both of them did a really, really good job. But yeah, like I think that Triptomics is the one that is going to do it for the next year also. So for anybody that doesn't know, you can go to their website and you can check out that leaderboard, and it's really cool. It's awesome.
Triptomics.com/leaderboard.
Dig it. Shout out to Caleb and Chris over there putting in the work, doing cool stuff. What happened to Altitude? Where'd they go? Why? Like, was that always going to be a one-time thing?
I think that
I haven't heard as much about them, and I actually didn't know that. I guess I should have known that, but I didn't.
So they did the Shroom Cup this past year. So yeah, I don't, they just
not so.
Yeah, so there's two separate cups here in Denver. You have the
Okay.
Shroom Cup, which Altitude put on. I think it was a month or two before the Denver Psychedelic Cup, and
For 2024.
Yes, for
Yeah.
2024.
Okay. Okay.
Their first cup was this past year, and that was what Altitude did the testing for. And then Triptomics did the Denver Psychedelic
Right.
Cup this year.
So the first year, the Denver Psychedelic Society, I forget what it's called, where they're like a separate organization, right? So
Yeah, so the Denver
like they were
Psychedelic
there.
Club, they're the
Club, yeah.
ones, yeah, they're the ones that
Yep.
host the events, and they present all the awards and
Okay.
everything, and I believe that they get the venue. And then there's the testing agency that they
Right.
collaborate with.
Got it. Very cool. Very cool. Glad to see some community building, some some galvanization and coming together of different people. I think that's great.
It's cool seeing all of the different cups also, because everybody's going to do things a little bit differently, and it's cool seeing how different people organize things and present differently.
Yeah, I'm really hoping in the future there will be a push for a consolidation of data. I think if you have 19 different cups, all sort of discreetly proprietarizing their data sets and all that, we're losing out on maybe coming up with some sort of standardization approach to this, like or within the limits of what HPLC can do. What are some data we should be collecting? How can we sort of build on this over time? Of course, there's no governing body. There's not even proficiency testing in this space yet for this kind of stuff. So hopefully, as the industry builds and the community builds, that can come together eventually.
Absolutely.
And then really start figuring some stuff out.
Mhm.
I think that would be great.
True citizen science.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, right. It's right. Instead of just having a big company write a check, you're just bringing a whole bunch of people together uh, with smaller amounts of money and being just more efficient, more intelligent, more careful with what's going on. I think there's an opportunity still from my perspective to accomplish more with all these cups, try to figure all that out. So if somebody wants something to do, you guys want a project out there, you're good at coordination, logistics, you're good at convincing scientists to share data, then there you go. I just gave you guys a project. Go do that. We need that in this community because there's a lot we don't know yet, and we are not even. I mean, not trying to be insulting, but most of these cups feel like a pissing contest, especially the early ones, where it's just like, look at me, I got the most potent fruit, but they're just the alkaloid profiles, the things that we can eke out as far as the more data we collect, and we can use that to then start teasing out correlations and then eventually focused experimentation around some of those correlations. I think then we start getting into some exciting stuff.
At a minimum, avoid what cannabis did, which was historically breed for higher THC, and they left out all the minor cannabinoids, so at least pay attention to the minors, in this case, minor alkaloids.
Yeah, man, it's like Mexican coffee, right? That Arabica, right? It's got more flavor, more flavor. It might not have as much caffeine, but it got more flavor.
Yeah.
You can't lose the flavor. It can't just be all about let's figure out how to make a mushroom that's got 14,000% psilocybin in it, and then you give away all the other stuff. And for some reason, nobody, sure, it gets you high as a motherfucker, but what did you lose?
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing that from many people in cannabis, where it's like, God, if I could just get my hands on some old Northern Lights again, I'd be real happy, right?
Yeah, those minors are definitely extremely important. And, hopefully over the next years, we figure out what exactly they do and how they affect the experience, and how they can, different types of psilocybin mushrooms maybe is a different tool in the toolbox for a therapist, which I think would be invaluable.
Or blunts, bro. Blunts. Watch out, Paul Stamets. Geeky gonna have some exotic blunts coming soon. Yeah, I mean, once we get some of that, once we can correlate an experience or a tendency for a certain quality of an experience to some of these secondary alkaloids, sky's the limit. And once we're teching out how to grow more species with psilocybin and these other tryptamine alkaloids in them, then we just gotta get like some chefs to come in, right? The Dave Wombats and my buddy Sean, who's a chef. You get these guys to come in and start doing a dash of this and a dash of that. Might have an experience none of us have even remotely thought about having yet. Who knows? Who knows? If you're in it to win it, if you're in it because you love it and you're not going anywhere, like these guys, you guys will probably be a part of that. You'll get to see that. I definitely am glad we got to sit down and do all this, get to know you guys a little bit better. I had a whole lot of fun. We definitely will have to do it again. Thank you.
Yeah,
so
really
much.
appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Geeky. Yeah, definitely appreciate it.
This was fun. I hope everybody paid attention, took some notes. There's definitely a lot of, I think a lot of people watching are going to go, oh, I can be more thoughtful about this. I'm putting most of us, if you're like me, you're putting a lot of time into this. It's just next level your thought process. I think you guys gave people a lot of things to think about, so that's really cool.
FAFO with intention. That's what we're trying to focus on.
I love it. I had somebody, I can't remember if they were on the show or we were just talking, but they were like, so a lot of people FA, not everybody FOs. They get the first part down, not the second part.
I think that intention is important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Cool. All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Had a blast. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Huge shout out to Santee Ango and Ryan Spooner for dropping some serious knowledge bombs tonight. I had a great time talking with them. If Full Canopy keeps pushing the limits like this, they're going to have to write another chapter in the old mushroom cultivation playbook. If you got something out of the show tonight, do me a solid. Hit that like button, subscribe, ring the bell. Don't miss an episode. And if you really want to support what we do, check out patreon.com/MycoGeeky. It really does help keep the lights on and keeps the deep dives coming. Drop a comment below. What blew your mind the most tonight? What do you want to see on the next episode? Let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay curious, stay cultivating, and